All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show, second hour of the program. As tensions in the Middle East escalate following recent U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, Ottawa facing questions about what role Canada should play in response to the widening conflict. Prime Minister Mark Carney has publicly supported the actions to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon and has condemned the Iranian regime's destabilizing activities, but he's also made it clear that Canada will not be directly involved in the fighting. At the same time, Ottawa has issued travel warnings, consular support for Canadians in the region, while police chiefs at home say there's no specific imminent threat to Canada, even as security services remain vigilant for potential spillover effects. I mean, we did see one of those effects last night in Toronto with a synagogue getting shot at. Let's go now to Dennis Horak. He's the former head of Canada's mission to Iran, also the former Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Mr. Horak, welcome to the program.
Morning.
So what's your opinion on the, first things first, what's your opinion on the military action? The measures that the U.S. and Israel went to over the weekend, what is your take?
I wasn't overly surprised that it took place. The U.S. had been building up assets in the region for some time, and the negotiations, according to the Americans in any case, weren't going anywhere. I was a little surprised it happened on the weekend, but it was something clearly that had been building for some time.
Do you think it was necessary?
I don't think there was anything imminent. I know there has been the President Trump has talked about that there was the Iranians were building a missile that could reach the United States and they needed to act now or it would be too late. I don't think that was true. I think the Iranians are a long way off from having that capability. On the nuclear program, yes, they were enriching to levels that could get close to weapons grade, but there's a big step to go from having weapons grade uranium to being able to fit a bomb onto a missile. But that being said, the nuclear program has been a long-standing concern for most of the world for some time. There was an agreement under Obama that Trump ripped up in the first term, the negotiation, but there remained a gap between, and they started to wanted to get a new agreement, but the gap between what the Iranians were willing to give up and what the Americans were demanding was just too wide to breach. So there was a long, that's not even to mention Iran's regional activities, which have been destabilizing for decades, and its treatment of its own people, as we saw in January, is horrific. So I shed no tears for the loss of the Ayatollah, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's, I just wonder about the alternatives, right? If there's not a military strike, what's the other option? Because it seems to me the other options was status quo forever.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, there was pressure building, certainly on the economic front, pressure building internally. The Supreme Leader was 86 years old. There was going to be a new one. Whether he would have likely have been cut from the same cloth as the previous ones. So there had been this effort at containment, some sort of an agreement that would have put restrictions on Iran's nuclear program, its enrichment, could have been possible. Not perfect by any stretch. Iran was also weakened considerably in the last year, certainly given the war last June. So it was a weaker Iran, but at a certain point, I think the world had become fed up with Iran, but this is a big step. This is a very risky step that was taken.
If the U.S. says that this isn't about regime change necessarily, right? And we've heard those comments from the administration. What do you think it's about? Is it just the nuclear program?
Well, this is one of the big questions that's out there. I mean, the objectives that they stated, the nuclear program, trying to deal with Iran's missile program, which has broad reach across the region, and other sort of nefarious activities that Iran carries out across the region. So those are sort of some of the stated goals. But what we don't know are what are the criteria for the U.S. and Israel to declare mission accomplished? We don't know that, and perhaps it's intentionally vague to allow the U.S. administration to at some point randomly say, "Okay, we're done here." We don't know, so it's hard to see in terms of regime change. There was early talk about we've cleared out the leadership. Iranian people. It's now your chance to take control of the government. It's not clear what that looks like, how you would get from A to B. I think everyone would like to see a different regime in place. I think there's sort of unanimity certainly across the Western world on that. But how you get there is a whole other story, and it could get extremely messy, chaotic, and anarchic in Iran. There isn't a unified coalition of opposition figures that could waltz in and take over were the government to collapse completely. So it's a very uncertain situation.
We're with Dennis Horak, who's the former Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, was also the former head of Canada's mission to Iran. Mr. Horak, let's talk about the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and his response to this conflict. He released a statement very early on, almost as soon as the news came out. And since then, he has not taken any questions from journalists. I know he's on an international mission. The journalists who are on that trip are quite livid, actually, that they haven't been able to ask him any questions. What do you think about the Canadian response, and how should the Prime Minister in Canada be handling this conflict?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised at all by the position that the government took. The concerns that the U.S. had expressed in the lead up to the war about the nuclear program, about Iran's regional activities, about its human rights record. These are concerns and grievances we've had with Iran for decades, really, or certainly elements of it for decades. And certainly when I was there, these were top of mind issues. So there was an alignment of policy concerns we had with the U.S. on this issue in the first place. Additionally, I think the government was concerned that to be offside with the Americans on this issue of such importance clearly to them, on issues that we were basically in agreement with didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think finally the number of Canadians that took to the streets in February demonstrating against the regime, I think also was something that the government took into consideration. I don't think that the politics of it were a decisive factor, but I think certainly was something that they took into account. There's been talk recently from the government, from Foreign Minister Anand, about the desire for a diplomatic solution to this. I think that's also consistent with Canadian policy that at some point there will need to be talks or need to be some discussion with Iran, directly or indirectly, on how to de-escalate the situation, particularly if this continues to affect the global economy certainly on the oil front. So there's a lot of moving pieces there, and I think certainly with Carney on his trip to India, I think he wanted, frankly, the focus to be on India, and events took that away. So whether keeping away from the media at this point was the smartest move, I don't know. I don't know.
Let me ask you before I have to let you go. Let me pick your brain from the diplomat's perspective. What do you think is going through the minds of Canadian ambassadors in the region, and how do you handle a conflict like this?
It's first of all, the number one priority for all of the missions in the region would be the safety of staff and the safety of Canadians in the region. There are tens of thousands of Canadians that are living in the Gulf states, are living in the Middle East, that are living in Iran even. The numbers we've seen, sort of 83,000 or so, is, I think, just a fraction of the actual numbers. Many, many, many who live there do not register with the embassy. So that would be priority number one. Also trying to get a sense on what the various positions are of the countries. Saudi Arabia has been attacked, all of the countries, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, you name it, Lebanon. They've all been engaged somewhat in this war. So trying to get a sense from the local governments what their positions are, how far they're willing to go into this war. Those will all be concerns. But priority number one would be the safety of Canadians. There's not a lot that the government can do at this point. Airports are closed. Moving around the region, even by car, would be very difficult and perhaps very dangerous. So it's a very challenging time. There are contingency plans for all of these countries, so those would be dusted off and looked very closely and coordinated very tightly with Ottawa. Any
surprise on how the other countries in the area have been reacting since this broke out on Saturday?
Not really. I think they always knew. We always knew that if things came to a head in Iran, and if Iran was cornered, they would lash out at all of the countries in the region. The logic in their minds is that if they raise the costs, hitting hotels, affecting the economy, all of those things, if they raise the costs for these neighboring states who are closely allied with the United States, that they would turn to the United States and say, okay, we've had enough, points been made, let's stop this, because they don't want themselves to be affected that dramatically. That was the Iranian rationale. The flip side of that, and that seems to be where we are now, and it's logical as well, is that these countries really didn't want to get involved in the fight. Yes, they host U.S. bases, but they didn't themselves want to become involved in the fight. As they've been attacked, we've seen the UAE and Saudi start to threaten to take a much more active role in the attack on Iran, and that would just add to the kind of firepower that can be brought to bear. I don't think they'll be greatly involved, but it does sort of change the equation a bit. That being said, if this were to continue and if the costs do increase both on the economic front but also in terms of the attacks on these countries and the risks of social unrest in some of them, I think then they might start to bring pressure on the U.S. to say, okay, maybe it's time to look for an off-ramp.
Mr. Horak, really insightful analysis and commentary with us this morning. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's Dennis Horak, a former Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, also the former head of Canada's mission to Iran.
Unmistakably Canadian.
It's the music that raised you.
The artists raising the bar.
Hi, this is Bryan Adams.
Hey, my name's Brett Emmons. I'm from the Glorious Sons.
Hi, I'm Nelly Furtado.
Made in Canada. The station that champions Canadian music.
Loud, proud, and all yours.
No passports required. Just press play.
Tap into Made in Canada now on iHeartRadio.ca
Or the free iHeartRadio app.